Whenever we talk to the team at Understanding Ag, we inevitably talk about diversity. And we're going to do that today, but not just about plant and livestock diversity. We're also going to talk about the benefits of having wildlife diversity.
How many people want to manage their ranch or their farmscape just for one species and a very linear, almost a monoculture, just like corn or soybeans? And in the 6-3-4, every part of the 6, the 3, and the 4, the common theme is diversity. Well, why not have wildlife species as part of your diversity in your operation if you're regenerating your soil?
We'll also talk to them about how to attract that diversity.
And there's species that have different requirements throughout the year. What's important for ringneck pheasants in January is different than it is in May and June when they're hatching their chicks.
And how to capitalize on that diversity.
And that was a really cool thing, but they have developed a complete agrotourism based on their ranch or their station. And it gives the option for folks to do what they want to do. So, hunting was part of that. Fishing's part of that. Bird watching was part of that. So that was really neat to see that in practice at large scale.
All that and more on this episode 434 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast. Very excited to welcome back Jeremy Sweeten and Kent Solberg, and we're going to talk to them about wildlife diversity. How do we build the habitat that attracts it? How do we capitalize on it? Some of the challenges that come with it, and how do we make sure that it is one of those compounding and cascading positive effects on our operation. But before we do that, let's hear a word from our sponsor today, the Soil Health Academy. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show, and many of those experts are farmer-rancher instructors for the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multi-species and marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself, so visit www.soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. Kent, Jeremy, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Great to be here.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation about wildlife, and I think that there's a tension that exists probably between agriculture and all of its various iterations and wildlife. And so kind of wanted to start off the conversation there, Jeremy, with you a little bit about your experience with some of the way that these two opportunities, because I think that's what they are, agriculture presents an opportunity, wildlife present an opportunity. We can flip our perspective and say they're both challenges, but they also are opportunities. So how do you think, or what's your experience kind of with the interface between these two opportunities of agriculture and wildlife?
So a bit of a background, Clay, is I grew up first generation farmer. I absolutely love being outside. My dad is a fisherman, a little bit of a hunter, a wildlife biologist, and got my love for the outside going. So as I've progressed down the path, I've gone down more the hunting path and enjoy that just as much as farming, and have experienced several different trips out west, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. And, the frustration comes when I look at those public ground grazing leases and even some of the ranches that are opened up for public hunting, and see the effects of poor grazing management and how that is very negatively impacting wildlife. And, with my work with understanding ag and understanding adaptive grazing, there's got to be a different way. So that's where these two worlds have met.
Sure. And Kent, your kind of background as well related to this topic, what is kind of your shape your thinking on these things?
Yeah, it started many, many years ago, high school even, in a rural community in North Dakota, and watching this tension between the conservation world, or the wildlife, the hunting world, if you will, and agriculture. And it was almost this unwritten rule that the two shouldn't meet, that they're not possible to have both on the same acre at the same time. And I really questioned that, and I don't know why, I just did, and began this quest that's brought me to, over 40 some years later to today, wondering if that's the case. And I think through the 634 that we teach at Understanding Ag, we can have both. We can have profitable agricultural operations, whether that's cash grain or livestock or just livestock, whatever, and wildlife at the same time, along with a host of other benefits. And so, that was my background a bit on that.
Sure. And in your mind, Kent, what are some of the things, and Jeremy, you can jump in here too, but what are some of the things that contribute to that wildlife habitat that's going to be conducive to, or attractive to them?
To the wildlife themselves, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So let's maybe back up. I want to back up a little, and a little background on just what is wildlife habitat. And at its base, it's food, water, shelter or cover, and then space. And each species has its own set of requirements. There are some overlaps, like whitetail and turkeys, just for example, quite a bit of overlap there. There's some overlap between sharp-tailed grouse and prairie chickens, just as another example, but there's no such thing as truly, quote, wildlife habitat. We have habitat for maybe a guild of species like grassland birds or coniferous forest birds or alpine meadow, species or whatever, but each has that differing requirement. Mule deer and whitetail, for example, have different habitat requirements, even though there's some overlap there, And then we've got things like Canada geese, which do extremely well on a golf course or a city park. And most people, by a broad definition of wildlife habitat, wouldn't say that that's wildlife habitat, yet it is. The geese thrive there. A garbage dump in the city municipal sewage pond are habitat for herring gulls, and most people wouldn't consider that habitat. So, it's understanding that there's all these differences. And then you got coyotes and whitetails that have adapted extremely well in municipal areas like big cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, Sioux Falls, Omaha, Nebraska. They're living right there with everybody else right in these suburban backyards. And so we got to be a little careful there, with that term. And I want to be a little careful as we go forward. But they need those things, and they also need this mix, this mosaic. In the wildlife world, they call it habitat heterogeneity, but it's a mixture of the height, density of the plants, and then the diversity of species out there. That's going to offer some of the greatest species richness. And species richness is kind of an indicator of the health of the land. And I would go so far as to argue that wildlife species richness is directly tied to soil health. We know from our work at Understanding Ags and with others that soil health drives plant nutrient density, and nutrient density is the food. So if you've got high quality food, there should be a response from the wildlife for that. So that's a biggie.
Kent, one thing I would add is, how many people want to manage their ranch or their farmscape just for one species and a very linear, almost a monoculture, just like corn or soybeans. And in the 634, every part of the 6, the 3, and the 4, the common theme is diversity. Well, why not have wildlife species as part of your diversity in your operation if you're regenerating your soil?
And that's what the pioneers of regenerative agriculture were talking about, is the loss of biodiversity. right?
Mhm.
That we're losing biodiversity. That's a symptom of an unhealthy ecosystem. And so then flip that on its head, when we start to regenerate that ecosystem, then the biodiversity comes back, and it's not just plants, it's not just microorganisms, it's macrofauna, megafauna, all these things come back and are more plentiful in their presence.
Yeah. Grassland bird species have been a big indicator. There's a bunch of research that's been going on that we've been a part of the last few years, and those peer-reviewed publications are being developed literally as we speak here, looking at the response of these bird species. Not only just numbers of individual species, whether it's ring-necked pheasants or meadowlarks or whatever, but also the species richness tied to regenerative ag. And the data is pretty strong, saying that there's a definite relationship there. And we've known for years, I mean, people have written for 80 years, maybe more, that wildlife's an indicator of the health of the land. But we have learned that some of these species are far more sensitive to some of the management that's going on out there, either positive or negative. And so the grassland bird species, I keep bringing it up because it's been a big one in the wildlife press, and it's a big one where most of our ag takes place. They're very sensitive to what's going on out there. But the cool thing is, when we start applying the principles of regenerative ag, of adaptive grazing, almost across the board, the producers we work with will tell us that's one of the first things they notice. There's all these birds they'd never seen before. People tell us, yeah, I learned what a bobolink was. I didn't know what a bobolink was. I learned what an upland sandpiper. I didn't know what an upland sandpiper was. All these things started showing up. They had to go get a bird book to figure out what some of them were, and they're pretty excited, or talk about their calves going in a cover crop or whatever and being startled by pheasants taking off, or them being startled by pheasants taking off out of the cover crop. And so excellent indicator. Insects are another one, especially predatory insects like spiders and walking sticks and things like that. They're just responding to this huge prey base that's under them. And so when you have a lot of, just say, predatory insects, it's just an indicator there's a lot of things clicking, and it goes all the way back to the foundation of that, which is healthy soil.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I wonder about, just kind of on connecting, piggybacking on what you said there about the presence of whitetail and Canadian geese in urban areas or golf courses or whatever we're talking about. I wonder if, and this, kind of step on some toes here probably, but if we're not putting pressure on them out of these once prairie ecosystems that are now monocultures, and we're pressuring them back into these more urban environments, because there is probably in some cases more biodiversity there, more opportunity to find the forages that they're looking for and the cover that they're looking for in some of those places than there is out in some of our agricultural contexts, which have become monocultures during only a short growing season and then bare soil for much of the year. So do you think that that's playing a role, or is there any evidence that that's playing a role?
That's part of it. It's one of those things, like the old movie said, you build it and they will come kind of thing. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. Some of these species, like whitetails or Canada geese or robins or crows or whatever, they're more habitat generalists. They're not as specific as, say, like a bobolink, a meadowlark, a prairie chicken, sharp-tailed grouse, and others are far more sensitive to those things. We've got whitetails in, farm country, on range land. We've got them in the city. I think the amount of, then it's a lot of times it's a population management thing. If the greatest thing they have to worry about in the metro area is, a Ford or a Chevy, and having a collision with one of those versus, a 270 bullet out on somewhere where hunting is common, those things play a role also. Plus the different dynamics, if there's, large predators like northern Minnesota or Wisconsin or western Montana, Idaho, we're dealing with grizzlies and cougars and wolves and things like that. that's a whole different dynamic that plays into that also. But some of it's just, they're habitat generalists. They don't need, they've done aerial survey work on whitetails in urban areas and see them lying down in the median of the road right away, in, the cloverleaf exits off the interstate, 20 feet away from the edge of the fence on somebody's, they're just right there. They've adapted extremely well. Same with coyotes, they're picking off house cats and eating the dog food on the back porch and digging through bags of garbage. And raccoons, another one. They're habitat generalists. So they're highly adaptable, and it works really well for them. The habitat specialist is where this gets really cool. And that's where we really see from regenerative ag some of the very, very positive things show up. And so many of our producers get excited. They'll tell us they haven't seen this, that, or the other thing here for years and years and years. So, and Jeremy's got some good stories of a ranch he's been working with in Montana on the response, not only wildlife, but even fish. Stream fishery that's happening. And this operator has been doing an excellent job since he purchased this property of keeping track of some of these changes.
Yeah. Jeremy, is the fish increase about limiting the riparian impact, or how is that playing out?
So the gentleman, and I'm going to put a short plug in here for Soil Health Academy, and we can talk about that a little later, but we're going to have a Wildlife Soil Health Academy on this ranch near Manhattan, Montana in June. And, the landowner will talk about when he quit applying commercial fertilizer, that's when the trout reds started to dramatically increase in the streams. And so I think it's a pretty unique tie to regenerative ag and an improvement in wildlife habitat. It's almost a linear effect. And that was pretty cool to hear. But, he also talks about having 50-some songbird species. He's an avid bird watcher. And having just a dramatic increase in songbird species. Our own farm, as we've been adaptively grazing, we've seen a dramatic increase in bobolinks and meadowlarks, and we have the easternmost huntable population of sharp-tailed grouse. And so we have a sustainable sharp-tailed population that we actually can open our farm up to public land hunting, which is pretty cool. I mean, that says something, that there's a sustainable population there because of the way we're managing.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. As farmers and ranchers, we've all heard pitches from ag consultants about the next great new product that will increase our yields, pounds, or animal performance. And each of those silver bullets comes with a price tag that you pay year after year, taking more money out of your pockets and putting it into someone else's. Our friends at Understanding Ag aren't out to sell you anything, but the knowledge to grow healthier soils, plants, animals, and profits. Their goal is to help you become your own best manager, a short-term client, but a long-term friend and partner on the road to regeneration. If you're still waiting for that next year that's going to be better, maybe it's time you give Understanding Ag a call. Check them out at understandingag.com. I know you'll be glad you did. Kent, one of the things that you mentioned early on was this myth of exclusivity, that they just can't meet the agriculture, the livestock, and the wildlife. You're going to have exclusivity of those areas, and it's one or the other. It can't be both. Can you talk about how you've seen that to be proven to not be true, and how we go about making sure that we're doing it in a way that fosters more of that relationship?
I think one of the quickest ways, a couple of the quickest ways in a grazing or, a ranch setting, moving to adaptive grazing, you're going to be creating this habitat heterogeneity. You're going to be building species diversity. You're going to have this mix of different heights and densities and there's species that have different requirements throughout the year. What's important for ringneck pheasants in January is different than it is in May and June when they're hatching their chicks, and where those need to go. Just as an example, those things just really start showing up. We hear people over and over, even my own place, and I have a wildlife background. That's where I spent a lot of time before I began farming full time, and it was stunning even to me to watch the increase in diversity and in the numbers of species over and over and over again just show up on my place. It's been really cool to see that we can have both on this ground. Another is when folks start using things like complex cover crops, particularly in the corn belt of the country, eastern South Dakota, Illinois, Nebraska, especially southern Minnesota, Iowa, eastern South Dakota. Just they talk about the pheasants that show up like crazy in these places. Even Gabe's talked about complex covers going into winter, and deer come from miles and miles and miles and pour into that. And so, and we hear it on ranches all over. Berg Teichert, who we work with, talked about it on ranches out west, and it creates a whole new set of opportunities for these land operators. Yes, there's potential for conflict, and I've spent a lot of time working in that arena too. And there's always going to be challenges, keeping the elk out of the hay pile and the deer out of the silage bag, and I get that, and I've got a lot invested in that, in dealing with those things. But at the same time, if we, can we turn it into an opportunity? How can we turn it into an opportunity? And I think, whether you're in the Midwest or out, further out west, and you got sizable acreage, I've seen people turn it into hunting opportunities on just a 40-acre parcel. And I've seen people do it, running 30, 40, 50,000 acres. So it's just adapting to the situation. And knowing that, particularly for the large ruminants, not so much for the birds, unless it's a goose problem or something, but for the large ruminants, to turn that into a hunting opportunity, and that you have to do that. You have to manage both. You're going to manage the habitat, whether intentionally or by default, using the 634, okay? And then you're going to have to manage how attractive your property comes. We've had some people like Illinois and Indiana, literally every deer for miles around shows up there because the nutrient density on their crops is so great. It's like, a telegraph going out, or a text message, or an Instagram going out, every critter in the countryside showing up there. And so you got to be prepared to manage it also. So like anything like this, every change comes with challenges, but boy, talk about a huge opportunity that we don't just have to look at it as something completely separate.
And this question is for both of you. What's the best way to manage that when you make that ecosystem so attractive to these deer or whatever the species is? What's the best way to manage that, or what are some good ways? Maybe both of you can give examples of good ways you've seen this managed well.
So what I think about is trying to mimic those native prairie ecosystems that we often base our regenerative ag picture off of, all the diversity that they had there. And, I understand that overpopulation, or a short-term overpopulation of especially ungulates, can be a pain in the rear, right? But getting that other animal impact out there as part of your regeneration process is a big deal. And, my own experience has been as we've been adaptively grazing and working towards rebuilding and restoring our soils, the forage quality, higher bricks because the soil's functioning, and the yield also increase. So as that whole process comes together, there's more, in our case, more white-tailed deer out there, but there's also more forage there. And so, it's kind of a check and balance system. As those more animals come in, there's also more yield. And I don't think as a farmer, I see a decrease in yield at all. There's plenty of feed for the cattle out there. So that's my take on it. My friend in Montana, where the Soil Health Academy is going to be, bought an overgrazed ranch. It was golf course from cattle, and all the acreage was, the cattle were turned out on it. It was grazed to the ground. And as he's rebuilt and restored that ecosystem, he's collected antler sheds over the last 7 or 8 years. And it started off with 2 or 3 sheds, and now he's up to 70 some sheds. And they proportionally get bigger year in, year out as that regeneration has happened. So that's been an interesting timeline to watch. So I guess it just depends in the eye of the beholder, that are they going to look at the increased wildlife as a negative or a positive? And I think anybody seeking opportunity will see that as a positive.
Yeah, right. You can be, the victim mentality, right? You can become a victim of the wildlife if you want to, but you can also look at it as an opportunity.
It can be a huge opportunity for several operations. It has become the way for adult children who want to come back to the ranch, a way to create another income stream, a very powerful income stream that can lead to other creativity on other income streams. Hunting seasons aren't 12 months out of the year, okay? But what else can you turn that? Can it be access to fly fishing? Can it be bird watching? I don't know that a lot of farmers and ranchers understand the zeal that bird watchers have for pursuing their hobby and are willing to travel, and just to see X, Y, or Z, and check it off their life list. That's a big deal it's kind of like the mountain climber, got to climb that next mountain, sort of thing. So it can be absolutely huge. And for a farmer ranch struggling to figure, especially a ranch thinking about transition, they're like, okay, cattle prices are great right now, but we might be in a drought, and I'm 62 or 65 or whatever, and the kids are thinking, some of them want to come home. What can they put together, with this? How can we leverage some of these opportunities, which with the ungulates, you're going to want to do some management, okay? And you're going to have to get a little creative. And there's folks, I've worked with farms and ranches figuring out how to leverage these opportunities within the context of their operation in the past. I worked with one guy one time. He had an apple orchard, and he was literally getting overrun with deer. And he wasn't necessarily looking for an income stream, but he turned it into a managed opportunity. He put these, the big box stands on each of the four corners of the 40 acres. He set up some specs on what you had to do if you truly wanted to hunt there. And it worked fabulously for him, and it created some opportunity. To come at it from the wildlife conservation side, there's a lot of concern that they've plateaued on their hunter numbers. And there's even concern in a lot of the outdoor recreation community that there's declines in numbers just because of our change of demographics in society, the family structure, access to other competing interests and opportunities, blah, 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 blah. But they always come back to having access for folks to go participate in some of these things, whether it's fishing, whether it's hunting, whether it's bird watching, whatever, is often a big thing. And yes, we're blessed with public land and a lot of public land in parts of the country here, but that doesn't answer all the opportunity. And sometimes those acres are, pretty jam-packed at certain times a year. So having other opportunities can remove some of that pressure from that public land, and create some very unique and positive opportunities on private land. And we were just having a conversation the other day about what to do, with all these animals, especially like deer. And it's like, build some goodwill in the community. Have a drawing for a youth only. A lot of states have these youth only or early youth deer hunts now. And sometimes you can only take antlerless, sometimes it's either sex, whatever, it doesn't matter. Work within the context of your state regs and offer a drawing for this, knock it out of the park opportunity for some 12, 13-year-old, 11-year-old kid to come out and take their first deer or two or three that's available in some parts of the country. You're going to get some management done that you want. It can build some goodwill in the community. You can work with, local groups to promote this. And, that's just one small way. And then it may be a way to attract other business. They're out there with their 11-year-old and, they take a couple does, but they see, the 180 score buck out there, and they're like, whoa, I want a chance at that. And so now they start having conversation about the paying side of things. So, and I know not everybody can do that, and that's fine, but it does take some pressure off. It helps spread that pressure out. One of the biggest problems we have in dealing with deer populations in agricultural parts of the country is hunter access. And so let's leverage this a little bit, whether it's you simply want to just deal with numbers or you want to turn it into an income producing stream to at the scope and scale that can bring one of your adult children back in the operation, let's explore those options. Let's make it happen. But it truly does create other opportunities.
Yeah.
Could I add a little bit more to that? I'm going to put a 180-degree spin on this, Clay. Kent and I had some conversation late last week, and, ranching and farming can be stressful. And as consultants, we often spend a lot of time working on the human dynamic, and it's not always cattle or farm ground or soil. But, if there's folks on the farm or ranch that enjoy being outside, this can be a side benefit to improve quality of life. It can be time spent with grandkids or kids. And, if the game's not there, it's a lot harder to leave the property to want to go hunting or spend time together. But if wildlife is there, then maybe you can go fishing or hunting and spend some more time enjoying what you've worked for rather than just to become a drudgery. So, that's a different angle.
Yeah, I know so many families where hunting is such a big part. I mean, if it wasn't for hunting season, I don't even know that a lot of these farm and ranch families see as many of their family as they do on Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, 4th of July, Memorial Weekend, whatever, as they do on the opening weekend of pheasant or deer season. Good grief. It's like, people come crawling out of the woodwork that you'll never see anywhere else. And that's where they connect again. And so it's an important part of many families and a big part of rural culture throughout the Midwest and West.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you talk about stacking benefits or stacking enterprises, even that hunting enterprise. If you don't even have to do, any kind of a cabin or a lodge or anything for people to stay in necessarily, but a lot of that infrastructure that might be created can also be duplicated for other things, like you said. Mm-hmm. And also, we got an episode coming up at the end of the month where we're going to talk to a guy who is doing this, and one of the groups of people that comes out to use his ranch is people wanting to take pictures, senior pictures, wedding photos, all that kind of stuff. And they pay, whatever it is per afternoon to just have the ranch to themselves to go where they want and take pictures and, within reason. And there's another one of those benefits of these kinds of things. So
I had the opportunity to spend 4 years visiting a host of, we'll just call them agritourism type operations. And when it was all said and done, it's really kind of left up to the amount of imagination you have, the amount of energy you have to put into it. It's a spectrum. It's absolutely everything from the very simple to the, we do everything but brush your teeth for you, kind of a thing. It's pretty crazy. It's an endless thing, and you can start small, you can grow it. And a lot of them find a lot of enjoyment in it. Some don't. Some have said, we kind of created another monster. Everybody wants to come out and they want to sit and talk to the farmer or rancher till 3 a.m. or whatever, 1 a.m. They're on vacation. I got to get up at 5 and, I got stuff to do. And so, you got to think it through. You got to understand what people are looking for, how it fits in your location, how you're going to manage the time piece of it. But again, this is where that opportunity for that other family member to come back and be a part of this, part of the home operation and keep it going can be absolutely huge.
Yep. Jeremy, do you have something on there?
Yeah. So actually, I was a recipient of this last month. My wife and I went to New Zealand for our 25th wedding anniversary, and we got to stay on a 45,000 acre station that had sheep and cattle and offered hunting. But on their coffee table were booklets. Every year there's a photography class that comes out and produces a booklet for them and takes photos all over the station. And that was a really cool thing, but they have developed a complete agro-tourism based on their ranch or their station. And it gives the option for folks to do what they want to do. So, hunting was part of that. Fishing's part of that. Bird watching was part of that. So that was really neat to see that in practice at large scale.
Right. Yeah. Jeremy, as you said earlier, the 634, all of them have in common diversity, comes up in all of the elements of the 634. And so maybe it makes sense then that a diversified income stream, a diversified portfolio of business offerings is also important for the success of an agricultural business, right?
Yes. Yes. It definitely builds resiliency on the financial side of things.
Well,
Yep.
And it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Go ahead,
it
Jeremy.
gives an opportunity for the folks that don't want to be the cowboy or the tractor driver to be fully involved with the ranch or the farm and bring a revenue income that normally isn't there in a traditional system.
Yep. And it's just all complementary. You know, you got a lot of these guys that are feeding them steaks from the ranch while they're there hunting. And, you know, oh, you want to take a quarter of beef home with you? Sure. You know, we can do that too. And so, I mean, it just, all these things start to stack on top of each other and compounding and cascading effects. And we can keep on stacking these illustrations. But yeah, so some of the other pieces of this conversation that you think are important, what was on your mind, Kent, there?
Well, let's talk about, you know, the 3 and the 4. The 6 are the 6, you know, principles of a soil health or regenerative agriculture, whichever you want to talk about. But a lot of this comes down to the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, the rule of compounding, as we were just positively joking about a little there. And they're either going to be positive, negative. They're never neutral. The diversity, we've talked about that a lot. But then the disruption piece of this. And wildlife respond to disruptions. And we want our disruptions to be planned and purposeful. Because this ties into the 4 ecosystem processes, which are, again, energy flow, which is basically photosynthesis in plants, the water cycle, absolutely huge. You know, what's one of the key elements of habitat? Water. So the water cycle is super important, and not only for aquatic species, but also land mammals. The nutrient cycle's operating properly. Our nutrient density for our forages, our feeds, our food component of wildlife habitat goes up. And then community dynamics, which is ecological succession, which is a form of diversity. And there are different guilds or groups of wildlife that fit best into different levels of ecological succession, okay? There are species like, if we've got a disturbed site and a lot of annuals, or as some people call them, weeds, are coming up, you know, that's pretty attractive to something like quail or mourning doves or something like that, versus on the other end of the extreme, old growth forest, which might be frequented by black bear or something like that, or barred owls or something like that. So, and there's everything in between, and they all fit. All these different guilds fit, and there's overlap as we go through it. But that's part of the diversity that's pretty important. So as we work towards these things, as we apply the rules of adaptive stewardship, as we build those disruptions in, if we truly are looking to add some sort of wildlife-based enterprise, whether it's photography or hunting or fishing or whatever, we can change a little bit, because our goals of we can make some tweaks to start favoring certain things maybe a little more. We don't want the pendulum to swing too far one direction. You know, we're there now. You know, if it's overgrazing, you know, that somebody picked up a place, or there's no cover out there, you know, 9+ months out of the year because we got to turn it black in the fall. That's not what we're after here. Okay, we don't want to go to that extreme, but at portions of the farm, we can do different things at different times under different intensities to maybe stimulate some of those different groups or guilds of wildlife that we want there. Okay, case in point, sharp-tailed grouse or prairie chickens, you know, they need that dancing ground, or it's called a lek, L-E-K, in the spring, and maintaining that by some well-timed grazing type events. You know, wow, you put a blind up there, man, you could have people lined up wanting to sit there with their cameras and take videos and pictures all day long, because it's pretty cool phenomenon to watch this time of the year. And it can just be something to do on top of the hunting ventures that might come in the fall or whatever, on however you want to do it. And so, you know, we as managers, we control the timing, frequency, intensity, duration, and pattern of what we do out on the landscape. So it's just starting to learn a little bit about what the different needs are of these critters, how we can tweak our management to do that, and start doing some of these things. And so, again, it's being adaptive in all that we do.
Are they looking for shorter grass in those leks, or what are they looking for?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be super short, but that's and they're historical generally. So if you're going to know where they are. They're pretty easy to find at sunup on this time of year going around. And it's not a huge area, and a lot of times it's on a knoll anyway that doesn't have heavy vegetation or something like that. But if there's brome encroaching on it, maybe you want to open it up. If it's short grass prairie out there, I don't know that you have to worry about it. So, but just, again, your context, which is one of the 6 principles, is going to dictate what we need to be doing or thinking about for our management. And again, we don't want to do it the same all the time. We want to move these things around also.
Yep.
That's kind of a great segue here because, this is Working Cows podcast. We haven't changed it to Working Elk yet. But, the tool that we can use are cattle.
Yes.
And we've seen that here. You can use a dry cow or a shortbred cow as a sledgehammer if you want to. You can really impact an area often, like a high density bison herd would have done. Or you can use those stalkers and just top something. So, that really still comes back to that adaptive grazing piece, but don't underestimate the power of the livestock that you have in your hand to use across that landscape.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate that. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, this Soil Health Academy that's happening in Manhattan, Montana, which if you don't know is just west of Bozeman, probably one of the more beautiful parts of Montana. And, as of right now, Fernando Falomir, Burke Teichert, Jeremy Sweeten, Kent Solberg, on this call today will be there, and so quite an opportunity to have those people with you at the Soil Health Academy, learn from them, and go out. As again, I always say when I talk about Soil Health Academy, the thing that just really drove home for me is the intentionality with which they will help you become a great observer. What are you seeing? What are you noticing? Over and over again, and then you just realize really there's no end to what you can notice if you know what to look for, and then you take that back on your operation and you do the shovel test and the infiltration ring, and you take a thermometer to the surface of the soil and see what the temperature is, and you smell the root zone and all these different things that you start to realize, oh, I can see the impact of different kinds of management opportunities on different places, and then make a decision about how I want to go forward. So June 17th through the 19th, links to all that will be in the show notes page for today as well, for sure, workingcows.net/435. But sounds like a great opportunity, and to really go more in depth on some of the things we've been talking about here today, for sure.
For those landowners that want to manage for multiple goals, want to manage for multiple income streams, what an opportunity to come and learn how to help you do that. If you're thinking about bringing again that next generation in there, or if you're already doing some of this stuff, how to take it to the next level. There's a lot of outfits out west that also do outfitting and guiding, and this can just build on top of that.
And having been boots on the ground on this ranch, this is going to be for landowners and ranchers and farmers and hunters and fishermen and bird watchers. So there's irrigated acres there that are still in a crop system. There's the Gallatin River and a beautiful trout stream flowing through this property. There's going to be livestock there. We're going to have this in action. But the landowner's goal has been to grow the whitetail population, the pheasant population, the trout that are staying in those streams. When I was there consulting, the insects were almost deafening during the day of how diverse that was. Like I say, the landowner has had elk and black bears and everything else moving through. And over 50 different songbird species have been found there. So it's a very diverse operation, and it shouldn't be siloed that you have to be a conservationist or a hunter to come to this. This is going to involve all type of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool. Very good opportunity. What else on this topic, or things that come to your mind that you think really are a big piece of succeeding with livestock, wildlife, getting the two working symbiotically rather than against each other?
So the adaptive grazing is a super large point if we're talking about a livestock operation, and using those animals to build that habitat heterogeneity. It's got to be well managed. And what an opportunity to make a positive statement for the greater public who really wonders, are cows the problem? It's like at least monthly, if not weekly, there's another article slamming cattle into the ground. And if we can have more examples out there about well-managed farms and ranches with livestock, and that people can see the positive response on water quality, bird life, pollinators, whatever, that's going to counter that, just writing letters, editorial type letters, or firing out Instagram messages saying this is a bunch of bunk isn't going to cut it. People want to see the evidence. And the more good evidence we have of this, the stronger case we're going to have on keeping animals on the lands, keeping livestock on the landscape, keeping livestock agriculture viable, and in the positive light of the greater public eye, because it has been in the crosshairs for a long time. And we need to be cognizant of that. And I think we can each do something for that. People want to see livestock on the landscape, but they also want to see, a healthy environment, if you will, when they're out there also. And we've demonstrated over and over again, it's not one or the other. It can be both. It's about making a choice and starting down this path. And we're here to help.
Yeah. And so I would add to this.
What are some of the examples of evidence that you would encourage people to keep track of, Kent?
On their own place? Is that what you're talking about? Or
yeah. Is that? Oh. Yeah, I think that's what you were saying earlier, right?
Yeah. So again, you brought up that we teach the observational skills at Soil Health Academies, and absolutely we do, because when the scales are removed from our eyes and we start to see these things in a new light, as Don Campbell said years ago, change how the way you see things if you really want major changes. And so that seeing things in a different light are huge. And so it's putting that shovel in the ground. Not only in that row crop field, but also in the field edge that hasn't been tilled for maybe a half a century or more. And look at what does the shovel show? The shovel doesn't lie, okay? Do the ring infiltrometer. Is the water going in seconds, or is it going in minutes, or is it going in heaven forbid, hours? And we've seen it. And what's it doing? What are you seeing just when you're out there putting in step-in posts and running polywire? Are you seeing frogs? Are you seeing toads? Are you seeing, snakes? Are you seeing skinks? Are you seeing, what kind of birds are you flushing up? Spend a little time learning, some of the key birds in your area. Are there pheasants and quail back there where they haven't been? We talked to guys who all of a sudden they got quail and pheasants back on their farm. They haven't had them in over 3 decades on their place. And all of a sudden they're back and they're so excited about that. Are you seeing more deer? Are you seeing more sheds? Just don't find it with the tractor tire. That's never good. Yeah. And do you see, I'll pick on my own place. I look out my window right now, and there's a corner of 3 properties that come together outside my window here. And one of the properties, it has been, quote, set aside for wildlife for a very long time, like 15 years. We rarely see anything. It's like the dead zone, man. And it's right up there with a lot of public land that allows little or no management with CRP. We've seen this on CRP acres for years. And we know the research shows that after 4 years in CRP, wildlife populations just tank after that. And I can go out and there's deer on our place. There's, pheasants, there's gray partridge, there's bobolinks, there's, all sorts of stuff using it. And it's literally right across the fence, and they're going to where it's more attractive. And so being cognizant of that, taking notes, like Jeremy said, documenting all those different bird species you're seeing. There's apps on the phone you can use. You can go old school and get a bird book, whatever. There's lots of ways to do this stuff. And spring's a great time of year to do this because a lot of the males have their breeding plumage on, so they're a heck of a lot easier to identify than those little brown birds that are all the females trying to camouflage themselves from the raccoon or the fox. So And bird calls. I mean, you can learn bird calls, even if you learn a couple a year, and add to that knowledge base, as well as monitoring plant diversity. Oh, good grief. I've got, last spring for us, we documented 2 new native plants on our place that we hadn't seen before. And it's like, I'm always looking for what's new this year, what's going to show up that's different, what's adding to that diversity out there. So keeping your eye open for all those things. And it opens up a whole new, farmers and ranchers tell us this makes farming and ranching fun again. It makes it exciting again. I'm learning new things. I'm seeing new things. My brain's active. I'm sharing it with my grandkids, with the nieces and nephews, whatever. It's just opened up a whole new world and a way to enjoy my operation that I never have in the past.
Yeah, I just watched Gabe Brown's TED Talk that he recently gave, and he said, I had the perspective before I made this shift of what am I going to kill today?
Yes.
And rather than now, my perspective is how can I get more life onto my operation?
Right.
And that's birds, that's wildlife, that's microbes, that's, all these things. We're trying to promote that life. And, you talk about learning the bird calls. If you have a bird survey done on your operation, as I understand it, that's how they do it. They sit there and they listen and they know what they heard and they write it down. This is what I heard. So that's oftentimes an easier way to do it. And the last thing I'll say before I let Jeremy jump in here is I've always asked my wife, why is it that the male human species is the only one that's uglier than the female species? Every other species, the male species
God has a sense of humor.
Yeah, more beautiful than the female. Yeah. So anyways, Jeremy, what were you were wanting to jump in there a bit?
Clay, how do I top that? I mean, you're trying to line there, buddy. So, but what you two were talking about, that's the whole thing that we've seen on our farm, and going back to Gabe talking about promoting life, is when we bought our farm, I have a series of pictures that I show in presentations that when we bought this farm in 2015, it was a hay field that was recently cut. There was no life there. And I have a picture in the same field from last fall that shows a stockpile pasture with cow-calf pairs out there, but on the back of the mama cow were like 8 cowbirds eating insects. And, it doesn't have to be a harvestable game species to be very valid to the entire ecosystem, that whole circle.
Yeah.
So, just as a consultant, people will ask me, well, how do I get started? Well, it takes test areas on your farm, do those test strips, do a grazing trial on your ranch, do something. But one of the first easy indicators after sticking a shovel in the ground and looking at the aggregation is look around and see what wildlife is there. That's such a key indicator because they know so much better than you do. So that's my take.
Yeah. That's a great point, Jeremy. And I think that is a kind of connected back to something that you said earlier, that the production is outpacing the demand. When we start to manage regeneratively, the production outpaces the demand. And yeah, we've got more wildlife, but there's more grass here than they can eat, and so the cows still have plenty, or whatever species it is still has plenty for them. And then the other thing on top of that, kind of what you were just saying, is you've got these other species that are coming in that aren't necessarily harvestable species, but they are reducing the parasite pressure, whether they're predator insects that are eating unbeneficial insects, or they're birds that are eating non-beneficial insects. And that's kind of taking that weight off of those cows and allowing them to thrive more and maybe have less of a nutrient demand that they're trying to meet from all the parasites and other things that they've got going on. So yeah, it's again all connected, and it's really really fascinating when you start to think about it, for sure. Really appreciate that.
It really is. And we continue to learn all the time. And, I'm a believer in learning is a lifelong process. And when we stop is a kind of a sad day. And so if we can keep learning, and there are people that have gone out of their way to put up, for example, nesting structures for barn swallows and tree swallows, because they're voracious foragers on flies. They will follow those cattle around in flocks, picking off flies. Yeah. And I mean, you're one of the best things you can do for your cattle. out there in the summer. And, bats are another one, eating insects, promoting simple little structures. There's simple little things we can do to promote some of this diversity that can have a whole level of enjoyment. Maybe you go out and clean nest boxes with a grandchild or a son or a daughter or whatever, or make it a 4-H project, or whatever. We can get creative with these things and create some unique opportunities that start to connect young people back to the farm and the ranch.
Yeah, everybody at my house has the spring fever, and they're wanting to be done with homeschool and get out into the outside. And so
this sounds like a homeschool project.
Yeah,
man.
Exactly. Yeah,
Start a bluebird trail.
Yep.
Yeah, put up pairs of houses, and they can keep the data and do the math, turn it in, write a report, turn it into a 4-H project. Perfect homeschool project.
Yep, for sure. Well, gentlemen, anything else you wish I would have asked you? Jeremy, anything else you want to add here as we point towards wrapping up?
I've had good conversation with Burke Kiker, and he talks about reducing the amount of linear thinking, which we've all been trained in, and thinking about everything as a systems approach. So just, when you're looking at your farm or ranch, look at it in a ecosystem circular type system and how everything is interrelated. That would be my last comment.
Yep. Very good. Kent?
Yeah, I would just say the 634 regenerative agriculture, adaptive grazing checks just so many boxes. Forage production, increases in forage production, increases in forage quality. We're building habitat heterogeneity. We're improving water quality. We can see positive benefits on wildlife species that a lot of them are in trouble. The populations have been declining. We're reducing our input costs, and we're increasing farm and ranch profitability, possibly even creating opportunities for that next generation and transitioning a profitable operation forward to that next generation. There are just so many boxes that get checked here, and literally spending a career digging into this and working on this, it's hard not to be passionate about it when you see the positives that come from this. And so if anybody's struggling with where to begin, please reach out. We're here to help. We want to help. We want to move you forward on this stuff.
Very good. Kent, Jeremy, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Clay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Very good stuff there with Kent and Jeremy. Really appreciate their breadth of experience and their way of communicating kind of how they have seen this work well. Just the number of acres that they get to consult on really lends credibility to what they're saying. They've seen it on so many different places over such a wide variety of different operations and seen the benefits of doing it well, and really, really just appreciate them coming on to share about that. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, looking forward to sharing with you a conversation that I had from Dalton Darnell of 310 Ranch Life, probably where you're familiar with him, but also he's got a new podcast out called The Art of Suffering, where he talks about how he has the lessons he's learned from dealing with an autoimmune disorder and how he has learned to suffer well, and the value of community and friendships, and of course his relationship with God in all of that. And so we're going to talk to him about that on the next episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll look forward to sharing it with you soon. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.